Welcome to this session, incorporating community voice, lived experience, and leadership in your court. Hello, my name is Brittany Davis, and I'm the Associate Director of Community Accountability and Engagement on the Gender and Family Justice team at the Center for Court Innovation. Today, we'll be talking about elevating the voices of people with lived experiences through the formation of advisory boards. I'm so lucky today to be joined by Peter Valdez, Court Administrator, and Robert Kingham, Court Operations Manager from Downtown Austin Community Court, and Keris Myrick, Vice President of Partnerships at Inseparable and host of the podcast Unapologetically Black Unicorns. Thank you, Peter, Robert, and Keris for joining us for this important conversation. I'd first like to start off by sharing some of the background of the center's work in this area. My team, the Gender and Family Justice team, has greatly benefited from the use of advisory boards in several of our projects. And our team, just to give you some context as well, works with courts and communities across the country to help them enhance their response to domestic violence, sexual assaults, and human trafficking. So we have two boards that we're currently running right now. One of them is comprised of individuals with lived experience of human trafficking for a project called Project Heal, helping to empower through advocacy and leadership. And through this project, we are developing a national leadership curriculum for survivors of trafficking to become more involved in advocacy and leadership systems change work. We've also recently launched a board that's been formed for an Office on Violence Against Women project called DV Risk, which stands for Domestic Violence Resources for Increasing Safety and Connection. It includes individuals who have experienced intimate partner violence themselves or who have lost a family member to intimate partner violence. Both boards have been tremendously helpful in enhancing the work on those particular projects. And I know the three of you are so incredibly experienced in this topic, and I'm really looking forward to highlighting your work, and I'm sure picking up some tips along the way for our boards. So I'm going to start with the Downtown Austin Community Court. So Peter, I'll throw the first question to you. I know that your court has a homelessness advisory council. Could you explain a little bit more about this council, when it was formed, and what it does?
Yes, thank you for the question, Brittany. The Austin Homelessness Advisory Council, also known as AHAC, is made up of 15 individuals with lived experience with homelessness. The Downtown Austin Community Court facilitates and supports the group, but the members of the group own that group. So basically all we do is we help them stay organized through facilitation and support. The Austin Homelessness Advisory Council serves as a resource for other City of Austin departments and social service providers throughout the community who are looking for input on policies, practices, and programming related to homelessness. DACC also includes AHAC in our contract solicitation processes for our social services that we acquire to serve the individuals on our caseloads. AHAC members provide input to help guide the development of the solicitations themselves, and they are part of the scoring processes once the applications are received. We are currently working on sharing these processes with other City of Austin departments so they can also benefit from the feedback that AHAC members have regarding their future solicitations. Lastly, the Downtown Austin Community Court Advisory Board, which is appointed by City Council, also accepts recommendations from AHAC, specifically related to the city's budgeting processes. AHAC also makes other recommendations to City Council via our advisory board. And one really clear example of a successful recommendation is related to our Violet Keep Safe Storage program, which was a result of a recommendation that AHAC made to council based on a need in the community for safe and secure storage of important items that people experiencing homelessness have.
Thank you so much, Peter, for that background and for that really great example of the power of working with folks with lived experience to kind of change and address gaps in your community response to those issues. I want to turn it to Keris and kind of back up for a moment and understand from your perspective, why is things like peer mentorship, peer support, and elevating the voices of folks with lived experience so important in this work?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for the question and also for having me here. And to Peter's response, I'm just blown away. That's amazing. And I think that exactly answers the question. I don't know now, do I need to answer it? But I will answer it. I think, when we think about things like programs, policies, practices, processes, I'm going to use all the P's. At the end of the day, they impact what? People. That's the other P. And that's the biggest P of all, right? And so when we're thinking about developing these things, if we haven't experienced that particular issue that we're trying to address, whether it be being unhoused, having a mental health condition or a substance use condition, having criminal justice involvement, all three, domestic violence, et cetera, if we haven't had that experience and we're devising policies or practices, how do we really know at the end of the day they're going to meet the needs of people as they need them? We may have a perception from the outside world, but we're not walking in those shoes. And so particularly, I'm a person with lived experience of a mental health condition. And many times, I'd be involved in something related to my treatment and go, wow, this really does not work. Who thought of this, right? And really want to give feedback to the system around, and the system really are people. The system is a thing, but, to leadership around ways in which it might work better, as did my peers. And when I use peers in that way, it's other people who might be receiving services. So, hearing our experiences and using those experiences to inform how we're going to develop or co-design. I like to use the word co. We're not going to do it alone. We're going to do it together. Designed, improved processes, systems, or practices is critically important. And I was just listening to another podcast, and a psychiatrist was saying, I had no idea why this person was not adherent. And eventually they said, when they really sat back and listened to a group of other folks with lived experience, peer providers, they suddenly had a completely different vantage point to understand that, in fact, the person didn't have the ability to get to the appointment. They didn't have the bus tokens or the funding to get the transportation to get to the appointment on time consistently. So instead of calling the person non-adherent or non-compliant, they really rethought how to support that person, either by doing telehealth, providing subsidies in order to be able to get the transportation so they could show up to the appointment. But like in the file, it said non-compliant. Right. So that's another reason I think why it's so important to hear the lived experience. Your clients might not be able to tell you, but advisors and advisory groups who are brought together can provide that feedback to provide that very, very valuable information.
That's so wonderful. And it's so important to be mindful of that, to ask questions, to develop programming in partnership with folks who are going to be receiving those services. I think of the phrase, nothing for us without us, and that feels like it's at the crux of this conversation. So thank you so much for that. I think something else that we, were really trying to think a lot about when we developed our own boards was how to make sure that the process and the experience provided a meaningful opportunity for folks with lived experience to share their voices and to share their expertise. At DV Risk Project, they are doing some really great work right now, creating a guidance document on how other jurisdictions can safely and meaningfully obtain feedback from survivors in their own communities to help inform different system change responses in domestic violence. So Robert, I want to go to you next for this question, and just wondering if you can share a little bit more about how the expertise and feedback from your advisory council has impacted your work in Austin.
Sure. Thanks, Brittany, and thanks for having me here today. Some other ways that AHAC has specifically helped the community court here in Austin is by providing guidance about how we could improve our communications, address barriers, and create a welcoming environment when we moved locations about a year ago. They've also advised the ACC on our practices across our department to help ensure that we're viewing and shaping our services, understanding the people that we're here to be serving. Now, AHAC's role does not specifically or stop here at the community court. They provide their lived expertise across other city departments here in the city of Austin. they've provided some assistance to our homeless strategy division on our HEAL effort, which is our housing focus encampment assistance link, which is when encampments are mitigated or cleaned in our community, there's a specific way that happens, and AHAC participated in designing that process to make sure that it's very human-centric and focusing on the individuals who are experiencing homelessness in those encampments. They've also assisted that division in creating a framework for the ARPA funding that came in our community over a year ago. And so over $50 million came into our community to address homelessness, and AHAC provided input to the homeless strategy division here on what buckets to allocate that funding. They've also assisted our community in creating a food access plan during COVID. Also, there was a lot of vaccine hesitancy in the homelessness community here in Austin, and AHAC helped provide input and feedback of how to communicate the importance of getting vaccine and the safety around getting vaccines. And that assisted public health in rolling that out and providing those opportunities for individuals experiencing homelessness. Another city department that we were really excited to work with was our Office of Police Oversight. And the Office of Police Oversight really wanted to figure out again how to build trust within the homelessness community. And AHAC was that pillar in the community that existed for the Office of Police Oversight to come in and say, hey, when we're trying to do the work that we're doing and provide oversight for Austin Police Department, how can we engage successfully with individuals experiencing homelessness? And so they have worked a number of times with AHAC to develop those strategies. And so that's a number of examples there of how AHAC has been successfully acknowledged and successfully interacted with to advance programs and advance efforts in our community that are impacting individuals experiencing homelessness.
Wow. That is incredible that there are so many examples there, so many different, organizations and agencies that you've been able to partner with your advisory council. And it sounds like you all are doing such incredible work. And I think this relates to another question that I wanted to throw out there. And I think something that we, we're thinking a lot about when we were developing our advisory board too, is that I think sometimes when you're, wanting to or starting to engage folks, with lived experience, there's the fear and there's the possibility of possible tokenization, right? And so, Keris, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, what that looks like and how folks who are maybe starting or thinking about starting an advisory board can prevent that and move towards more meaningful participation, like it sounds like the folks in Austin are really, really doing.
Other things to think about are sometimes we don't know why decisions are made. We give all this input, we don't see any output. So being able to close the loop, I think, is super important. So people feel like, oh, I was heard, and I understand why something that we put forth as a group couldn't be done. There's a policy barrier, there's a structural barrier. Oh, that comes from the federal government. Didn't know, thought it was you. Now I get it. I think the other one is that's tough for people is when people show up and they are having a hard time engaging, meaning they're not behaving the way we want them to behave, right? Like, oh, behave. No, there may be reasons that they're having a reaction to something that's on the agenda. It may be a triggering reaction. So how do we sit back with our own discomfort as somebody is going through a reaction and doing their best to communicate what it is they're trying to communicate relative to the topic on the table? That's what I love about peer support, by the way. So peer supporters who are trained, who have lived experience of mental health conditions and other intersections are trained to support another. So sometimes having a peer supporter at a meeting or come with someone to a meeting to provide that extra level of support should it get tough for a person to be in the meeting. Secondarily, for those of us who are helping facilitate these meetings, and if somebody has a reaction we're not comfortable with, we need to check ourselves around not imposing terminology on that person. Oh, they're so challenging. Well, maybe we're challenged. Maybe we don't have the language. We don't have the experience. So how do we sit back again and learn to sit with that discomfort and support the person? And then lastly, I think what has been super helpful is actually providing some level of, I'm going to use this word in quotes, training to people who are going to be on an advisory committee. Sometimes people will just throw somebody on an advisory committee and not talk about sort of, and how can we show up for this meeting, and when do you need extra support? How do you ask for extra support? How do you mindfully give space, take space, if you will? And so we have on occasion even provided training to people who want to learn how to be more effective on advisory boards when they are people with lived experience of homelessness, mental health conditions, substance use, and the like.
Awesome. Thank you so much for those concrete suggestions. And I took a look at those resources before and found them incredibly helpful. But I also wanted to name something that comes up a lot for us when we're working with sites too, and is that for a variety of reasons, a jurisdiction or community or a project might not be able to have a full advisory board. And so I just wanted to hear, and I'm going to throw this question to you again, Keris, of any suggestions you have for folks who can't quite get there, but still want to have some way to be able to incorporate the voices of those with lived experience into their work.
That makes me think about, really maximizing the use of peer-run organizations. A lot of times I don't want to say we forget about them, but we think of them as treatment only, but or support only, but they also provide these kind of supports for people to be in advisory supports. Also, sometimes, I will literally search on podcasts and I will try to find voices of people with lived experience on different podcasts so that I can capture that, especially if they're from a particular area or a particular service that I'm looking for, whether it be experiencing homelessness, criminal justice, mental health, or substance use disorder in a particular state. So I can refer the person who's trying to get some input but doesn't know quite how to do it to that particular podcast to listen to that person's story. And then I also think, doing outreach and engagement, like how can we get feedback in ways that are not traditionally around meeting in a particular place at a particular time between the hours of, but how can it be a little bit more fluid where we're going where people are? So maybe it is in the homeless encampment, maybe it is in the church where domestic violence folks are having a meeting and you're able to spend 5-10 minutes with them to get some feedback. So I think we have to, for me, I'm always thinking outside of the box.
Awesome. Thank you so much for those. And I love that they're outside the box. I had never considered the podcast suggestion that you had. That's really, really great. I want to switch back to the advisory board that you all have in Austin. And I know when we were forming ours, we were thinking about a lot of different things. We had to consider the diversity of the board members. This was a national board too. So we were thinking about location representation, thinking about experience, thinking about background. We were also thinking about things like the timing and frequency of meetings, and also compensation was a big thing that we wanted to make sure that we were able to do for ours. And so just wondering, Peter, if you can talk a little bit about what you thought about kind of going into establishing your advisory council and how is it funded?
Sure. So Austin's Homelessness Advisory Council was actually created by the city's innovation office through a grant from Bloomberg Philanthropies. And they actually supported the group for about 2 years. And then they approached us about taking the group over. And for us, it was really a no-brainer because it was a natural alignment based on the work that we focus on in terms of serving individuals experiencing homelessness. So we decided to take on the group. We did not receive any additional funding for the group. So we had to really carve out money through our own general fund, the funding that already existed in our budget, to make sure that we were able to incentivize the individuals each time that they attended a meeting and participated in the functions that were established through that agenda.
One of the most important things that we think everyone should keep in mind is the approach has to be genuine. It can't, it can't, cause that tokenism. You have to think broadly what diversity means, and you've heard a lot about that today. But when you think about participating or having individuals participate in these lived expertise groups, you have to go beyond just race, ethnicity, age, gender, identity, sexual orientation. There's diversity that exists within lived experience that you're trying to learn from. And so we have 15 active members at AHAC, and they all have different experiences with homelessness and homelessness services, as well as differing opinions from one another. When you work, your work necessitates engaging individuals with lived experience in the criminal justice system. The types of experiences and circumstances and the services that those folks have engaged in will be as broad as a criminal justice system is. And so it's important to seek out a wide and diverse representation when seeking lived experience, as no one person should, can, or should have to carry the weight of speaking for a whole group.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think another thing that we were, wondering about and thinking about when we were establishing our board was trying to make sure that it was trauma informed. So ensuring a safer space for board members. We know we can't guarantee complete safety for anyone, but trying to make sure that the space that we created was one where the participants felt comfortable building relationships with us, the team members who were kind of facilitating the process, each other, comfort to be able to discuss topics like human trafficking and domestic violence, and also be able to share feedback and suggestions for our project. So I'm wondering, Keris, if you could talk a little bit about kind of a trauma-informed approach to peer mentorship and the formation of these boards, why that might be important, and any specific strategies that folks can use to help make the experience more trauma-informed or more engaging, I would say, for folks who are coming to the table and participating in this way.
Yeah, so there are a couple of things that I think about when we're talking about making it engaging and safe for people to enter into conversations that may be triggering, traumatizing, bring up stuff that's really tough. The first place I start is looking at the organizational culture period, not even about the advisory board yet. And I start to think about, is the organization in and of itself welcoming, engaging, reducing trauma of its own staff? Because the way that I think about it is that we think about the people we serve as those folks over there who have all of these issues that we have to help them with all of their issues. We are not immune to those issues ourselves. And many times there'll be people who are on staff who have had previous experience with homelessness, domestic violence, maybe living with a mental health condition or not out and open about it, or a substance use disorder. And so we have to create environments, I believe, a culture or an environment of what I call sort of a health and well-being culture, which also includes thinking about trauma and triggering and creating that space for our staff. If you've done it in your organization, then it'll work fine for the board, right? So because you're going to carry that forth, it's a part of who you are and how you live out your day as an organization. So, but let's say you're starting at that, or you haven't thought about that with intention in that way. So some of the things I think about is first of all, when creating the agenda, usually agenda created by the people themselves who are on the board, that they talk about what they believe might be helpful to support folks who may be triggered by something that's on the agenda. That could have, again, having a social worker in the room, having another peer supporter in the room. Peers are trained in trauma-informed practices to support other folks. A lot of times people worry, oh, they're going to get traumatized themselves. No, we know when we're going to get traumatized. We have our boundaries, just like other providers. We understand where our boundaries are and how to help support people. I think also there are other things that are almost like access things that I like to think about too, which is, who's leading the meeting and how are they leading the meeting? How are we creating a welcoming environment when people come in, just to sort of really create that welcoming and safe environment? Also, I think about, where are the bathrooms? How are the bathrooms labeled? Who has access to the bathrooms? Are we meeting in a place where staff have one bathroom and everybody else has another? That may be triggering and also not very welcoming to people who are coming in who've experienced homelessness and or criminal justice involvement. Also, do people have to walk through metal detectors or be wanded by guards or security? How can that either one be eliminated? If it can't be eliminated, how can meetings happen someplace else?
Is incredibly helpful, and I love the very concrete and specific kind of action items that you provided for folks to be thinking about, and even just thinking about our broader organizations as well. I think you're absolutely right that you may have folks that you're working with who might not be on the advisory board, but who have similar lived experiences, and wanting just to create that culture of support, that culture of welcome, and that culture of wellness that you talked about in our organizations in general. Well, this has been such a truly rich conversation. I'm so grateful to have been able to talk with you all today. I learned a lot and have a lot to bring back to my own team. And I hope this was helpful for the folks across the country who will be listening to this. But before we close out, I just wanted to see if anybody had any final thoughts to share with courts and jurisdictions who might be interested in establishing their own advisory boards or mentorship programs.
Yeah, I'd love to provide a little more information about AHAC and just some final thoughts. AHAC has been just an invaluable resource, not only here to the community court, but the city and the overall community as a whole. We believe in this principle that it is critical to incorporate lived experience into planning for services and policies, anything impacting individuals that are being affected by those services and those policies and those programs. And they need to be done to ensure that services are, impactful, that they're respectful, and they meet the needs of those who they're designed to serve. And I encourage every community who is interested in implementing a group like this to make sure that you're compensating individuals for their participation. And then lastly, we want everyone to know that the Downtown Austin Community Court here in Austin is happy to be a resource for anyone looking to start a similar group in their community. And we truly believe that lived expertise should be and must be incorporated in all of these decisions and policies that are being made, in communities across the country.
Thank you so much for that. Keris, do you want to close us out with the last word?
Yeah, I'll just say briefly that and this is my saying for lots of things: when in doubt, talk it out. If you're really not sure about how to do something or you're struggling with it, sometimes you just want to throw in the hat and go, oh, this isn't going to work. When it's just like you need a little extra support, a little extra technical assistance, if you will. Robert just offered himself up for that, so there you go. And that also the other power of being on an advisory group, especially for people who are marginalized or most marginalized or minoritized, if you will, is it does lead to, as Peter said, for many people, employment opportunities. Maybe not right in the moment, there may be compensation, but I will tell you that I started my career, which I didn't think was going to be a career. I was off doing something completely different. And it was on an advisory group with the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And then I became its board president at the national level, the first African-American and first diagnosed with schizophrenia, to be their national board president, to what I'm doing today and working in the field. So it can open doors for people. Sometimes we see them on what is their worst day, but partaking in things like an advisory group can help us see them on their best day and make those days better. So it's such a great opportunity for people, and I'm glad you're having this conversation. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you all so much again for your wisdom, for your insight, for sharing all of the really powerful work that y'all are doing in your communities. And thank you to our wonderful audience for watching. Feel free to take a look at the resources that are in the conference website that we mentioned today, and hope everyone has a lovely day. Thank you so much.